My name is Cameron Walsh, and I'm 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood in the Meridian Contemporary Gallery in downtown Chicago, watching strangers bid on my paintings with an intensity that made my hands shake. The final piece, a large abstract canvas I'd created during my darkest period, sold for $52,000. The woman who bought it told me it spoke to her soul about resilience and transformation. What she didn't know was that my own sister had called that exact same painting meaningless garbage just 18 months earlier. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But before I tell you how I went from being dismissed as a talentless dreamer to having collectors fight over my work, let me take you back to where this all began. Growing up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, I was always the kid with paint under my fingernails and sketchbooks scattered across my bedroom floor. While other children played video games or watched television, I was lost in worlds of color and imagination, creating characters and landscapes that existed only in my mind until I brought them to life on paper. My parents, Robert and Linda Walsh, were practical people who valued stability above all else. Dad worked as an insurance adjuster for 32 years, methodically climbing the corporate ladder through dedication and reliability. Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, spending her evenings grading papers and preparing lesson plans with the same systematic approach she applied to everything in life. They weren't unkind people, but they viewed the world through a lens of pragmatism that left little room for artistic pursuits beyond childhood hobbies. Then there was my sister Victoria, 3 years older and everything my parents hoped their children would become. Victoria excelled academically, graduating valedictorian from our high school before earning a full scholarship to Northwestern University. She studied business administration with a focus on corporate finance, completing internships at prestigious firms each summer. By the time she was 25, Victoria had landed a position at McKinsey & Company, earning a salary that made our parents beam with pride at family gatherings. Victoria possessed a sharp intelligence that she wielded like a precision instrument, analyzing situations and people with calculating efficiency. She had little patience for what she considered frivolous pursuits, and from early childhood, she made it clear that she viewed my artistic interests as exactly that. While our parents maintained polite neutrality about my drawings and paintings, Victoria was never one to soften her opinions with diplomatic language. The first time I remember her really crushing my artistic spirit was during my sophomore year of high school. I had spent weeks working on a portfolio piece for my advanced art class, a detailed pencil drawing of an old oak tree in our backyard. I was particularly proud of how I'd captured the intricate texture of the bark and the way afternoon light filtered through the leaves. When I showed it to Victoria, hoping for some rare sisterly encouragement, she barely glanced at it before delivering her verdict. "Cameron, you need to understand something about the real world," she said, not looking up from her calculus homework. "Art isn't a career, it's a hobby. And frankly, this isn't even good hobby work. The proportions are off, the shading is amateur, and the whole concept is boring. Nobody wants to buy pictures of trees." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the casual dismissiveness in her tone, as if my weeks of careful work weren't even worth a moment's serious consideration. I rolled up the drawing and never showed it to anyone else, though my art teacher later selected it for the school's annual exhibition. Despite Victoria's harsh critiques, I couldn't stop creating. Art wasn't just something I did, it was something I needed to do, like breathing or sleeping. Throughout high school, I continued taking every art class available, from painting and sculpture to digital design and photography. My teachers were encouraging, particularly Mrs. Henderson, who taught advanced placement studio art and frequently stayed after school to help students develop their portfolios. Mrs. Henderson was the first adult who talked to me seriously about pursuing art beyond high school. She had studied at the Art Institute of Chicago before becoming a teacher, and she understood both the challenges and possibilities of an artistic career. During my senior year, she helped me prepare applications for several art schools, including the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design and the California Institute of the Arts. When acceptance letters started arriving, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. RISD had offered me a partial scholarship for their illustration program, while CalArts had accepted me into their fine arts degree with a focus on painting and mixed media. These were institutions that took art seriously, places where I could develop my skills and potentially build a career doing what I loved. The family meeting to discuss my college plans took place on a rainy Sunday afternoon in March. I had laid out all my acceptance letters on the dining room table, along with scholarship information and career outcome statistics I'd researched for art school graduates. Victoria was home for spring break from Northwestern, and I could see the skepticism in her expression before I even began speaking. "These are impressive acceptances, Cameron," Dad said, examining the RISD letter. But have you looked at the total cost? Even with the partial scholarship, we're talking about over $40,000 a year. I've researched financial aid options, I replied, my voice more confident than I felt. And I can work part-time while studying. Mrs. Henderson says. There are opportunities for students to earn money through campus jobs and freelance projects. Mom frowned at the pamphlets I'd spread across the table. But what kind of job prospects do art graduates actually have? Teaching positions are limited. And from what I understand, very few artists make a living selling their work. There are lots of career paths, I insisted. Illustration, graphic design, museum work, art therapy, gallery management. The art industry is much bigger than people realize. Victoria, who had been silently reviewing the materials, finally spoke. Cameron, I think you need a reality check here. I've been looking at these statistics you printed out, and they're misleading. Yes, some art school graduates find work in creative fields, but the median income is barely above poverty level. Most end up taking jobs completely unrelated to their degree just to pay off their student loans. She picked up the CalArts acceptance letter, examining it with the same clinical detachment she might apply to a financial report. $53,000 a year to learn painting. Do you realize how much debt you'd accumulate? And for what? To create pretty pictures that maybe a few dozen people will ever see. It's not about creating pretty pictures, I said, struggling to articulate something that felt so fundamental to who I was. Art is about communication, about expressing ideas and emotions that can't be captured in words. It's about making people think and feel and see the world differently. Victoria laughed, not mockingly, but with the kind of patronizing amusement adults reserve for children's naive statements. That's a beautiful sentiment, Cameron, but it doesn't pay rent. You're talented at art the same way some people are talented at crossword puzzles or karaoke. That doesn't mean you should build your life around it. The conversation continued for over an hour, with my parents asking increasingly practical questions about career prospects and earning potential. Victoria dominated the discussion with statistics and economic arguments, systematically dismantling each point I tried to make about the value and viability of artistic careers. By the end of the meeting, the pressure to choose a sensible major had become overwhelming. My parents weren't forbidding me from pursuing art, but their concern about my financial future was genuine and impossible to ignore. Victoria's arguments, delivered with her characteristic blend of intelligence and certainty, made my artistic ambitions seem not just impractical but actively foolish. 3 days later, I declined the art school acceptances and enrolled at the University of Minnesota to study business administration, following the same path Victoria had taken. My parents were relieved, Victoria was smugly satisfied, and I felt like I had betrayed the most essential part of myself. The first semester at the university was brutal. While other students seemed energized by their coursework, I struggled to find motivation for subjects that felt completely disconnected from my interests and talents. Accounting principles, microeconomics, and business statistics filled my days with numbers and theories that meant nothing to me on any emotional level. I tried to maintain some connection to art by taking an elective drawing class, but the instructor treated it as a casual hobby course rather than serious artistic study. The other students were primarily business and engineering majors fulfilling their arts requirement, and the projects reflected that casual approach. After spending years in Mrs. Henderson's rigorous studio classes, the university art elective felt like a hollow substitute for genuine creative work. Victoria, meanwhile, was excelling in her junior year at Northwestern, regularly calling home with updates about internship opportunities and academic achievements. During family dinners, conversations inevitably centered on her latest accomplishments and future prospects, while my struggles with business courses were met with encouraging platitudes about finding my stride in a practical field. The breaking point came during finals week of my first semester. I had been studying for my accounting exam in the library when I came across an art magazine someone had left behind. The featured article profiled recent graduates from various art schools, showcasing their work and describing their career paths. Many were thriving in exactly the kinds of positions I had dreamed of pursuing. As I flipped through pages of vibrant paintings, innovative sculptures, and compelling illustrations, I felt a physical ache of longing for the life I had abandoned. These artists were my age, talking passionately about their work and the impact they hoped to make through their creative expression. They faced financial challenges, certainly, but they were building careers around something they loved, something that gave their lives meaning beyond monetary success. That night, I called Mrs. Henderson and told her about my struggles with business school. She listened patiently as I described the emptiness I felt studying subjects that held no personal significance, and the growing certainty that I had made a terrible mistake in abandoning my artistic path. "It's not too late to change course," she said gently. Art schools accept transfer students, and you could reapply for next year if you're serious about pursuing this path. But you need to be honest with yourself about why you want to do this and whether you're prepared for the challenges. We talked for nearly 2 hours about the realities of artistic careers, the importance of developing both creative and practical skills, and the various ways artists could build sustainable livelihoods while maintaining their creative integrity. By the end of the conversation, I knew what I needed to do. The decision to transfer to art school wasn't one I could make lightly or announce casually. I spent the rest of winter break researching programs, preparing a new portfolio, and building the courage to have another family meeting. This time, I was determined to advocate for my choice with the same conviction Victoria brought to her arguments against it. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The portfolio I assembled represented 4 years of artistic development, from my early high school drawings to more recent pieces I had created in secret during my business school semester. Looking at the collection as a whole, I could see genuine growth and potential that went beyond hobby-level dabbling. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were explorations of color, form, and emotion that demonstrated both technical skill and creative vision. But even as I prepared to fight for my artistic future, Victoria's voice echoed in my mind, questioning the value and viability of everything I hoped to achieve. Her dismissive assessment of my work had planted seeds of doubt that continued growing despite my determination to prove her wrong. The second family meeting would prove to be even more challenging than the first, as Victoria had spent the intervening months collecting additional ammunition for her arguments against artistic careers. She had researched employment statistics, student loan default rates, and economic projections that painted an increasingly grim picture of creative professions in an uncertain economy. What I didn't yet understand was that this conflict with Victoria would become the defining struggle of my early adulthood, pushing me to either abandon my artistic dreams entirely or find the strength to pursue them despite her relentless opposition. The path ahead would test not only my creative abilities but my capacity to believe in myself when the person whose opinion mattered most continued telling me I was destined to fail. The second family meeting took place during spring break of my freshman year at the University of Minnesota. I had spent weeks preparing my arguments, researching successful artists who had built sustainable careers, and organizing my portfolio into a presentation that demonstrated my growth and potential. This time, I was determined to approach the conversation with the same methodical preparation Victoria brought to her business analyses. The dining room felt different as we gathered around the same table where I had first presented my art school acceptances 9 months earlier. My parents sat with the polite attention they reserved for serious family discussions, while Victoria occupied her usual position of authority, laptop open and a folder of printed materials at her side. She had clearly been preparing counterarguments during her own spring break from Northwestern. "I appreciate that you've put thought into this, Cameron," Dad began after I had finished presenting my case for transferring to the Art Institute of Chicago. "But we're concerned about the financial implications of changing course now. You've already completed a year of business school, and starting over would mean additional time and expense." "The business courses would transfer as electives," I explained, referring to my folder of academic requirements. "And the Art Institute has several scholarship programs for transfer students. I've already spoken with their admissions counselor about the process." Victoria leaned forward, her expression mixing patience with the kind of exasperation typically reserved for explaining obvious concepts to slow learners. "Cameron, let's talk about what happened to your high school classmates who chose artistic paths. Do you remember Jessica Martinez, who went to that expensive photography school in New York? She's working at a portrait studio in the mall now, taking family photos for $50 a session." She flipped through her prepared materials, producing printouts that supported her argument. "Or David Chen, who studied graphic design at that art college in California. He graduated with $60,000 in debt and ended up taking a job at a copy shop designing business cards and flyers. These aren't isolated cases, this is the typical outcome for art school graduates." "Those are just 2 examples," I countered, though I felt my confidence wavering. "There are successful artists everywhere. Look at the galleries downtown, the advertising agencies, the film industry in Minneapolis. Someone has to create all that work." "Yes, someone does," Victoria agreed. "But it's usually people who treat art as a business first and a creative outlet second. The romantic notion of the struggling artist who eventually gets discovered is exactly that, a romantic notion. In reality, most working artists are either teaching to pay their bills or they've compromised their artistic vision so completely that their work becomes indistinguishable from commercial manufacturing." Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly torn between supporting my dreams and protecting me from potential failure. Honey, we're not saying you should stop making art entirely. But maybe you could study business and pursue art as a serious hobby? Some of the most successful artists had other careers that provided stability while they developed their creative work. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Victoria said, seizing on Mom's suggestion. Take someone like Charles Ives, the composer. He worked in insurance his entire career and created his music in the evenings and weekends. He didn't starve for his art, he built a sustainable life that allowed him to create without the desperate pressure of needing every composition to pay his rent. The comparison stung because it highlighted something I wasn't ready to admit, my fear that I wasn't talented enough to make art my primary career. Victoria's examples of failed artistic careers resonated with deeper insecurities about my own abilities, doubts that had been growing throughout my year of business school. But Ives was a genius, I said quietly. His situation was unique. And besides, he lived in a different era when career options were more limited. Exactly my point, Victoria replied. Ives was a genius, and even he needed another source of income. What makes you think you're so exceptional that you can succeed where countless talented people have failed? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I found myself unable to provide a convincing answer. What made me think I was special? My art teachers had been encouraging, but teachers were supposed to be encouraging. My work was competent, maybe even good, but was it good enough to justify the financial risk and family stress I was proposing? The meeting ended with a compromise that satisfied no one. I would complete my sophomore year at the University of Minnesota while taking additional art classes as electives. During that time, I would research artistic careers more thoroughly and perhaps find opportunities to test my abilities in real-world settings. If, after a full year of exploration, I still wanted to transfer to art school, my parents would consider supporting the decision. Victoria seemed pleased with this outcome, clearly believing that a year of practical research would cure me of my artistic ambitions. I think this is wise, she said as we were clearing the table. Once you understand the economic realities, you'll see that there are ways to incorporate creativity into a business career. Marketing, advertising, product design, these fields need people with artistic sensibilities who also understand commercial objectives. That summer, I took a job at a local advertising agency, hoping to explore Victoria's suggestion about combining creativity with business practicality. Brennan & Associates was a mid-sized firm that handled accounts for regional businesses, from car dealerships to restaurant chains. They hired me as an intern in their creative department, which sounded promising until I discovered what creative meant in the context of commercial advertising. My first assignment was designing newspaper ads for a furniture store's annual sale event. The account manager provided specific requirements. The store's logo had to be prominently displayed, sale prices needed to be highlighted in red text, and the overall design should convey urgency and value. There was no room for artistic interpretation or creative expression, just the mechanical assembly of required elements according to established formulas. Marcus Rivera, the senior designer who supervised my work, had studied graphic design at a respected art school before joining Brennan & Associates 5 years earlier. During lunch breaks, he would sometimes show me examples of his personal artwork, paintings and digital compositions that demonstrated genuine creativity and artistic vision. The contrast between his personal work and his daily assignments was stark and depressing. You learn to compartmentalize, Marcus explained when I asked how he managed the disconnect between his artistic goals and commercial responsibilities. The agency work pays my bills and gives me health insurance. My real art happens in the evenings and weekends, when I can create whatever I want without worrying about client approval or market research. But don't you feel like you're wasting your talent on furniture ads and restaurant promotions? I asked. Marcus laughed, but there was sadness in his expression. Some days, yeah. But I've got a mortgage and a daughter starting college next year. My personal artwork doesn't sell often enough to support those responsibilities. At least this job lets me use some design skills, even if it's not exactly what I dreamed of doing in art school. The conversation with Marcus crystallized everything Victoria had been telling me about artistic careers. Here was a talented, educated artist who had been forced to compromise his creative vision in order to earn a living wage. His personal work was beautiful and meaningful, but it existed in the margins of his life, subordinated to commercial demands that had nothing to do with artistic expression. Other employees at the agency had similar stories. Sarah Kim, who created layouts for print advertisements, had originally studied fine arts with dreams of becoming a painter. Now she spent her days arranging product photos and promotional text according to client specifications, her artistic training reduced to ensuring proper color balance and font selection. James Patterson, the agency's lead copywriter, had studied creative writing in college and published several short stories in literary magazines. His current job involved crafting 30-second radio commercials for auto repair shops and crafting compelling descriptions for consumer electronics. His creative writing continued as a weekend pursuit, but the demands of full-time commercial work left little energy for personal projects. By the end of the summer, I had accumulated substantial evidence supporting Victoria's arguments about artistic careers. Every creative professional I met had been forced to compromise their artistic vision in order to earn stable incomes. The advertising industry paid well compared to many creative fields, but it required artists to subordinate their personal expression to commercial objectives determined by market research and client preferences. When I returned to the University of Minnesota for my sophomore year, I felt more confused than ever about my future direction. The business courses still felt meaningless and disconnected from my interests, but my summer at the advertising agency had shown me the limitations of professional creative work. Victoria's vision of treating art as a serious hobby while building a stable business career began to seem like the most reasonable compromise. I enrolled in additional art classes that fall, including advanced painting and sculpture courses that allowed me to explore more ambitious projects. Professor Angela Martinez, who taught the painting class, had a different perspective on artistic careers than the commercial designers I had met during my internship. The mistake most young artists make, she said during one of our individual critiques, is thinking they have to choose between financial security and creative integrity. The most successful artists I know have found ways to support their work that don't require them to compromise their vision. Teaching, grants, residencies, alternative exhibition spaces. There are more opportunities now than there have ever been for artists who are willing to think creatively about career development. Professor Martinez had built her own career through a combination of teaching, gallery representation, and public art commissions. Her work was exhibited regularly in regional museums, and she had received several significant grants that allowed her to pursue large-scale installation projects. She represented a model of artistic success that hadn't been presented during my family discussions or my summer internship. The key, she continued, is developing multiple revenue streams rather than depending on any single source of income. I teach because I enjoy working with students and because it provides steady income and benefits. But I also sell work through galleries, receive commission payments, and apply for grants that fund specific projects. No single source provides enough income on its own, but together they allow me to live comfortably while maintaining complete creative control over my work. This conversation opened my mind to possibilities I hadn't previously considered. Maybe Victoria's binary thinking about artistic careers, that artists either succeeded commercially or failed financially, was overly simplistic. Maybe there were ways to build sustainable creative careers that didn't require the kind of artistic compromise I had witnessed at the advertising agency. I began researching alternative models for artistic careers, studying artists who had found ways to support their work through teaching, grants, residencies, and other opportunities that allowed them to maintain creative independence. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Victoria's pessimistic view of artistic careers was based on incomplete information and outdated assumptions about how creative professionals could build sustainable livelihoods. During Thanksgiving break, I attempted to share these discoveries with my family, hoping to demonstrate that artistic careers offered more possibilities than Victoria had acknowledged. I had prepared a presentation about successful artists who had built sustainable careers through diverse revenue streams and creative thinking about professional development. Victoria listened politely to my research, but her response was swift and devastating. Cameron, you're cherry-picking exceptional cases and pretending they represent typical outcomes. For every artist you've mentioned who built a sustainable career, there are hundreds who tried the same approaches and failed. You're doing exactly what unsuccessful people always do, focusing on rare success stories instead of acknowledging statistical realities. She had prepared her own research during the break, compiling data about artistic career outcomes that painted a much bleaker picture than my optimistic examples. Student loan default rates among art school graduates, median income statistics for creative professionals, and employment data showing high rates of career changes among artists who eventually abandoned creative fields for more stable work. I'm not trying to crush your dreams, Victoria said, her tone mixing genuine concern with familiar condescension. I'm trying to protect you from making a decision that will negatively impact the rest of your life. You're talented, Cameron, but talent isn't enough. You need to be realistic about what kind of life you want to build and whether an artistic career can provide that life. The argument that followed was more intense than our previous discussions, with both of us presenting research and examples that supported our opposing viewpoints. My parents watched uncomfortably as Victoria and I debated the value of creative work versus financial security, the role of art in society, and the personal responsibility individuals have to make practical career choices. By the end of the evening, I felt exhausted and defeated. Victoria's arguments were supported by substantial data, while my optimism about artistic careers seemed increasingly naive and unrealistic. Maybe she was right that I was focusing on exceptional cases while ignoring typical outcomes. Maybe my artistic ambitions were based more on romantic fantasies than practical assessment of my abilities and the economic realities of creative careers. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom surrounded by paintings and drawings I had created over the years, I made a decision that would haunt me for the next several years. I would abandon my plans to transfer to art school and commit fully to completing my business degree. Art would remain a hobby, something I pursued for personal satisfaction rather than professional ambition. Victoria had won the argument, but neither of us understood yet what that victory would cost. The next 2 years passed in a haze of corporate presentations, financial modeling assignments, and internships at firms that specialized in risk management and portfolio optimization. I threw myself into business school with the kind of desperate determination people usually reserve for escaping burning buildings. If I was going to abandon my artistic dreams, I reasoned, I might as well excel at the practical alternative Victoria had championed. My grades improved dramatically once I stopped fighting the curriculum and accepted that my future lay in conference rooms rather than studios. Professors began noticing my work, particularly in strategic planning courses where my visual thinking skills helped me create presentations that stood out among the standard PowerPoint templates most students relied upon. Without realizing it, I was using artistic abilities to enhance business communications, finding small ways to inject creativity into an otherwise sterile academic environment. Victoria, meanwhile, had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern and landed a coveted position at Goldman Sachs in Chicago. Her starting salary was more than our father had earned after decades in insurance, and she quickly established herself as one of the most promising analysts in her incoming class. During family phone calls, she would describe her work with the kind of enthusiasm I once felt when discussing new painting techniques or color theories. "The energy here is incredible," she told us during one Sunday evening call. "Yesterday I worked on a merger analysis that could impact thousands of jobs and billions in market value. The responsibility is enormous, but so is the potential to make a real difference in how companies operate and grow." I listened to these conversations with a mixture of admiration and envy. Victoria had found work that excited her intellectually, while providing substantial financial rewards and clear advancement opportunities. Her success validated every argument she had made about choosing practical careers over artistic pursuits, and I couldn't help wondering whether I would ever feel that same sense of purpose and accomplishment in business. My own internships during college provided glimpses of what my post-graduation life might look like. The summer after my junior year, I worked at Midwest Financial Solutions, a regional investment firm that managed portfolios for middle-class retirees and small business owners. The work was stable and reasonably well compensated, but it felt completely disconnected from anything I cared about on a personal level. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, was a competent analyst who had built a solid career helping clients navigate complex financial decisions. She appreciated my presentation skills and attention to visual detail, often asking me to create charts and graphics that made complicated investment strategies accessible to clients who lacked extensive financial knowledge. "You have a real talent for making dry material engaging," Janet observed after I had redesigned a series of quarterly reports. "Have you considered specializing in client communications? There's growing demand for people who can bridge the gap between technical expertise and clear presentation." The compliment felt hollow, even though I recognized Janet's genuine appreciation for my work. Using artistic skills to make mutual fund performance charts more visually appealing wasn't exactly the creative fulfillment I had once imagined, but it was apparently the closest I would come to artistic expression in my chosen career path. During my senior year, I maintained a rigorous academic schedule while participating in case competitions and networking events designed to help business students secure employment after graduation. The process felt mechanical and impersonal, requiring me to present a carefully crafted version of myself that emphasized leadership potential and analytical thinking while completely ignoring the creative interests that had once defined my identity. At career fairs, I spoke confidently about my interest in financial planning and my desire to help individuals and organizations make sound investment decisions. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like lines from a play I was performing rather than authentic expressions of my professional goals. But employers responded positively to my presentations, and by spring I had received offers from several regional firms. The art supplies in my bedroom remained largely untouched during this period, gathering dust as physical reminders of abandoned dreams. Occasionally, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep, I would sketch or paint for an hour or two, but these sessions felt more like guilty indulgences than serious creative work. I told myself that art would remain a relaxing hobby, something to pursue for personal satisfaction rather than professional ambition. Victoria visited home for my college graduation, arriving with expensive gifts and stories about her rapid advancement. At Goldman Sachs, she had been promoted ahead of schedule and was already being considered for positions that typically required several more years of experience. Her success provided a stark contrast to my own modest achievements in business school. "I'm proud of you for sticking with your business degree," she told me during a private conversation after the graduation ceremony. "I know it wasn't easy to change direction, but you made the right choice. Now you have options and stability. That would never have been possible with an art degree." Her words were meant to be encouraging, but they highlighted how completely I had internalized her perspective on artistic careers. I had stopped thinking of my abandoned art school plans as a sacrifice and began viewing them as a near miss with financial disaster. Victoria's success had become the standard against which I measured my own decisions, and by that standard, choosing practical over passionate seemed obviously correct. My first full-time job was with Heritage Investment Group, a firm specializing in retirement planning for government employees and educators. The work involved analyzing pension systems, evaluating insurance products, and helping clients optimize their savings strategies for post-career financial security. It was exactly the kind of stable, socially beneficial career my parents had hoped I would pursue. The office environment was pleasant enough, with comfortable workstations and colleagues who were generally competent and friendly. My supervisor, David Chen, had worked in financial services for 15 years after completing an MBA at the University of Chicago. He appreciated my presentation skills and gradually assigned me more client-facing responsibilities as I demonstrated competence with complex investment analysis. "You have a natural ability to explain complicated concepts in accessible ways," David observed after I had successfully guided a nervous teacher through her first major investment decision. "That's a rare skill in this industry. Most people with strong analytical abilities struggle with client communication." The positive feedback was gratifying, and I found myself developing genuine expertise in areas like tax-advantaged savings accounts and long-term care insurance. But even as I built professional competence, I felt a persistent sense of emptiness that I couldn't quite articulate. Work provided intellectual challenges and financial security, but it didn't provide the sense of personal meaning I remembered feeling when I was deeply engaged in creative projects. Victoria, meanwhile, had been recruited by a prestigious consulting firm and relocated to San Francisco, where she was earning a salary that seemed almost absurd to someone with my modest financial background. She purchased a condominium in Pacific Heights and began investing in startup companies, building wealth at a pace that validated every argument she had ever made about the importance of choosing lucrative career paths. During family gatherings, conversations inevitably centered on Victoria's latest professional achievements and investment successes. She would describe complex business deals with the same passion I once felt when discussing color theory or composition techniques. Her enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, making my own career seem pedestrian by comparison. "The key to success in consulting," she explained during one Thanksgiving dinner, "is developing the ability to analyze any business problem quickly and recommend solutions that create measurable value. Every client engagement is like solving a puzzle, and the solutions can impact entire industries." I listened to these descriptions with growing awareness that Victoria had found work that genuinely excited her, while I was merely competent at a job that felt increasingly routine and unfulfilling. She wasn't just earning more money than me. She was building a career that provided intellectual stimulation and personal satisfaction in ways that my financial planning work never could. The contrast became even more stark when Victoria began dating Thomas Bradley, a venture capitalist who shared her passion for business strategy and entrepreneurial innovation. Thomas had studied at Stanford Business School before joining a firm that invested in early-stage technology companies, and their conversations about market trends and investment opportunities were animated and enthusiastic. During family visits, Victoria and Thomas would discuss business ideas with the same energy I remembered from my most engaging conversations about art and creativity. They were building a life together around shared professional interests, while I was struggling to find personal meaning in work that felt increasingly mechanical and disconnected from my authentic interests. One evening during Christmas break, while Victoria and Thomas were engaged in an animated discussion about blockchain technology and its potential impact on financial services, I slipped away to my childhood bedroom and pulled out a sketchbook I hadn't touched in months. The simple act of holding a pencil and making marks on paper felt like returning to a language I had forgotten I could speak. For the next 2 hours, I drew without conscious intention, letting my hand move across the page while my mind wandered away from quarterly reports and investment portfolios. The resulting sketches weren't particularly sophisticated, but they represented something authentic that had been missing from my life since I had committed fully to the business career path Victoria had recommended. When I finally returned to the living room, Victoria and Thomas were still deep in conversation about market opportunities and competitive advantages. They barely noticed my absence, absorbed as they were in discussions that clearly energized and excited them. Watching their enthusiasm, I felt a sharp pang of recognition for what I had lost when I abandoned my own passionate interests in favor of practical career considerations. That night, I lay awake thinking about the profound difference between work that challenged your intellect and work that fulfilled your soul. Victoria had found both in her business career, but I was beginning to suspect that financial planning would never provide the deeper satisfaction I was craving. For the first time since making my decision to abandon art school, I wondered whether I had chosen security at the cost of something even more valuable. The sketches I had made that evening sat on my nightstand, physical evidence of creative abilities that remained intact despite years of neglect. Looking at them in the dim light from my bedside lamp, I felt the first stirrings of a question that would soon become impossible to ignore. What if Victoria had been wrong about art being worthless? What if the real mistake wasn't pursuing artistic dreams, but abandoning them before giving them a genuine chance to succeed? The months following that Christmas evening sketching session marked the beginning of a quiet rebellion against the life I had constructed according to Victoria's blueprint. At first, the changes were barely perceptible: 15 minutes of drawing during lunch breaks, weekend visits to art supply stores where I would wander the aisles without purchasing anything, lingering longer than necessary at the small gallery near my office building. My work at Heritage Investment Group continued smoothly, with steady client growth and positive performance reviews that positioned me for advancement within the firm. David Chen had begun including me in strategic planning meetings, recognizing my ability to identify market trends and communicate complex financial concepts to diverse audiences. From every external measure, my career was progressing exactly as it should, but internally, I was experiencing a growing disconnection between my professional success and personal fulfillment. The satisfaction I derived from helping clients optimize their retirement savings felt increasingly hollow, like solving puzzles that held no deeper significance beyond their immediate practical value. I found myself daydreaming during client meetings, sketching abstract patterns in the margins of financial reports while discussing asset allocation strategies. The turning point came during a particularly routine day in March. I was reviewing portfolio performance data when my computer screensaver activated, displaying a rotating selection of famous paintings I had programmed years earlier during college. Suddenly, Van Gogh's Starry Night appeared, and I found myself studying the swirling brushstrokes with an intensity that surprised me. For nearly 10 minutes, I sat transfixed by the image, remembering the first time I had seen the original painting during a high school art class field trip to the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Mrs. Henderson had spent an hour discussing Van Gogh's technique, pointing out how the artist had used color and movement to convey emotional states that transcended literal representation. At 17, I had understood instinctively what she meant. Now, at 25, I felt that same recognition stirring after years of dormancy. That afternoon, instead of returning home after work, I drove to the Minneapolis Institute of Art. For the first time since college, the museum felt both familiar and foreign, like revisiting a childhood neighborhood after years of absence. I wandered through galleries I remembered from school trips, reacquainting myself with paintings and sculptures that had once felt personally significant. Standing before a large abstract expressionist canvas by Helen Frankenthaler, I experienced something I hadn't felt in years: the electric recognition of artistic communication that bypassed rational analysis and spoke directly to emotional understanding. The painting's flowing color fields seemed to capture something essential about human experience that could never be reduced to words or numbers. An elderly woman standing nearby noticed my absorption in the painting. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said quietly. "I've been coming here for 30 years, and this piece still stops me in my tracks every time." "What do you see in it?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She smiled thoughtfully. "Joy, maybe. Or possibility. The way color can move across a surface and somehow capture feelings that you didn't even know you had." She paused, studying my face. "Are you an artist yourself?" The question caught me off guard. "I used to be," I replied automatically, then corrected myself. I thought about being an artist once, but I chose a different path." "Ah," she said with understanding that seemed to encompass more than my simple explanation. "Well, the beautiful thing about art is that it's always there when you're ready to return to it." Her words stayed with me during the drive home and through the evening as I attempted to focus on client files and market research. Later that night, I retrieved The art supplies I had abandoned in my bedroom closet, setting up a small workspace at my kitchen table. I started with simple exercises, color mixing, basic forms, studies of objects around my apartment, treating the process like physical therapy for dormant creative muscles. The initial results were frustratingly amateur. Years of neglect had atrophied skills that once felt natural and intuitive. My color sense seemed dulled, my understanding of proportion uncertain, my ability to translate visual ideas into physical marks compromised by lack of practice. But beneath the technical rustiness, I could feel something authentic stirring, a way of engaging with the world that felt fundamentally different from analytical thinking. Word of my renewed artistic interest somehow reached Victoria during one of our monthly phone conversations. I had mentioned visiting the art museum, thinking it was an innocuous detail, but she seized on it with characteristic intensity. "Cameron, I hope you're not getting distracted by old fantasies," she said, her tone mixing concern with familiar condescension. "You've built a solid foundation in financial services. This isn't the time to start questioning practical decisions that have served you well." "I'm not questioning anything," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I just visited a museum." "People do that for cultural enrichment." "Of course they do. But given your history, I worry that you might romanticize artistic pursuits again and lose sight of the progress you've made in building a stable career. Remember how difficult it was to transition away from those impractical dreams? You don't want to put yourself through that confusion again." Her warning was delivered with genuine sisterly concern, but it carried an undertone of threat that I was only beginning to recognize. Victoria's investment in my business career wasn't entirely altruistic. My success validated her worldview and her role as the family's voice of practical wisdom. If I began questioning the choices she had convinced me to make, it would implicitly challenge her authority and judgment. Despite Victoria's warnings, I continued my evening art sessions, gradually extending them from quick sketches to more ambitious projects. I began experimenting with acrylic paints, working on small canvases that explored color relationships and abstract compositions. The work was therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected, providing emotional release from the analytical demands of my day job. My apartment slowly transformed as I accumulated art supplies and displayed my experimental paintings on walls that had previously held only generic prints and family photographs. The change in environment reflected a deeper shift in how I was beginning to think about my identity and priorities. For the first time since college, I was creating something purely for personal expression rather than external validation or practical application. The quality of my work improved steadily as I redeveloped technical skills and explored contemporary approaches to painting that I had never studied in high school art classes. I subscribed to art magazines, watched online tutorials, and began following contemporary artists whose work inspired new directions for my own exploration. The learning process felt urgent and necessary, like recovering from an extended illness. By summer, I had accumulated enough new work to consider showing it to other people. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying, given Victoria's devastating critiques of my earlier artistic efforts. But I needed external feedback to understand whether my renewed creative work represented genuine artistic development or merely nostalgic self-indulgence. My first step was reconnecting with Mrs. Henderson, who had retired from teaching but continued to mentor young artists through a community art center downtown. When I called to arrange a studio visit, she remembered me immediately and expressed genuine enthusiasm about seeing my recent work. "Cameron, I've wondered about you over the years. I'm so glad you're making art again. Bring whatever you've been working on, I'd love to see how you've developed." Mrs. Henderson's studio was a converted warehouse space filled with her own paintings and works by former students who had maintained relationships with her after graduation. The environment felt charged with creative energy, a stark contrast to the sterile efficiency of my office building. When I spread my recent paintings across several easels, Mrs. Henderson studied them with the same careful attention I remembered from high school critiques. Her expression revealed nothing during the initial examination, but I could sense her analytical process as she considered technical execution, compositional choices, and artistic voice. "These are strong, Cameron," she said finally. "Much stronger than I expected for someone who's been away from serious art making for several years. You've developed a sophisticated understanding of color interaction, and your compositional instincts have matured considerably." Her positive assessment felt like receiving oxygen after holding my breath underwater. "But are they good enough?" I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting my creative sessions. "I mean, good enough to matter beyond personal satisfaction?" Mrs. Henderson smiled at the familiar anxiety of an artist seeking validation. "Good enough for what? To sell in galleries? To win competitions? To communicate something meaningful to viewers?" Those are different standards, and they're all subjective to some degree. She pointed to one of my larger abstract pieces, a composition, exploring tensions between geometric and organic forms. This painting has something to say about contemporary life, the ways we try to impose order on experiences that resist categorization. That's valuable artistic territory, and you're exploring it with technical competence and personal authenticity. Victoria thinks art is essentially worthless unless it generates substantial income, I said, surprising myself with my directness. Victoria is your sister who works in finance, right? Mrs. Henderson asked, remembering family dynamics from our previous conversations. I'm sure she's very successful in her field, but that doesn't qualify her to evaluate artistic merit or cultural value. Some of the most important art in human history was created by people who never earned significant money from their work. Her words crystallized something I had been struggling to articulate about Victoria's approach to evaluating artistic careers. Financial success was certainly important for practical reasons, but it wasn't the only meaningful measure of achievement or contribution. By Victoria's standards, most teachers, social workers, and public servants were failures because they had chosen service over maximum income generation. The question isn't whether your art will make you rich, Mrs. Henderson continued. The question is whether making art makes you feel more authentically yourself and whether your work contributes something valuable to cultural conversation. Based on what I see here, the answer to both questions is yes. Our conversation lasted nearly 3 hours, covering artistic technique, career development strategies, and the various ways contemporary artists built sustainable practices around their creative work. Mrs. Henderson introduced me to several other artists who had found ways to support themselves through teaching, commercial applications of their skills, and gradual development of gallery representation. The models she described were more complex and varied than Victoria's binary thinking about artistic success versus failure. Real artistic careers, it seemed, involved creative problem-solving about both aesthetic and practical challenges, requiring entrepreneurial thinking alongside creative vision. When I left Mrs. Henderson's studio that evening, I carried with me not just validation of my recent work, but a renewed sense of possibility about what an artistic life might actually look like. For the first time since college, I began seriously considering whether I might be able to build a creative career that provided both personal fulfillment and financial sustainability. The drive home was filled with plans and possibilities that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I was beginning to understand that returning to art would require more than just technical skill development. It would require the courage to challenge Victoria's authority and risk her disapproval. The stakes felt enormous, involving not just career decisions but fundamental questions about identity, family loyalty, and the courage to pursue authentic self-expression despite external pressure to conform to practical expectations. The momentum from my studio visit with Mrs. Henderson carried me through the following weeks with renewed creative energy and a growing sense of artistic purpose. I began working larger and more ambitiously, transforming my spare bedroom into a proper studio space complete with professional easels, adequate lighting, and storage systems for canvases and supplies. The financial investment felt significant on my modest Heritage Investment Group salary, but it represented a commitment to taking my artistic development seriously. My work schedule adapted to accommodate expanded creative sessions. I woke earlier to paint for an hour before heading to the office, used lunch breaks for sketching in nearby parks, and dedicated entire weekend days to sustained studio work. The double life felt energizing rather than exhausting, as if I was finally integrating essential parts of myself that had been artificially separated for too long. The paintings that emerged during this period were more confident and sophisticated than anything I had created previously. Working with acrylics and mixed media, I developed a visual language that combined geometric structures with organic forms, exploring themes of urban alienation and natural connection that reflected my own experience navigating between corporate environments and creative expression. The work had a maturity and coherence that surprised me, suggesting that years of forced dormancy had actually allowed my artistic vision to develop subconsciously. My newfound creative confidence led me to research local galleries and alternative exhibition spaces where emerging artists could show their work. Minneapolis had a thriving contemporary art scene that I had been completely unaware of during my business-focused years, with dozens of galleries, artist-run spaces, and pop-up exhibitions that provided opportunities for artists to connect with audiences and collectors. The Riverside Arts Collective, a cooperative gallery in the Warehouse District, caught my attention because of their emphasis on supporting artists who were developing professional practices. They offered monthly portfolio reviews where established artists and curators provided feedback to emerging talents, along with workshops on practical aspects of artistic careers like pricing work, approaching galleries, and building professional Networks. Attending my first portfolio review required significant courage, as it meant exposing my work to strangers who had no obligation to be encouraging or supportive. I selected 12 paintings that best represented my current direction, ranging from smaller exploratory pieces to larger, more ambitious compositions that demonstrated technical development and artistic vision. The review panel consisted of 3 local art professionals: Marcus Rivera, a painter whose work was represented by several regional galleries; Susan Chen, the director of a non-profit art space; and Dr. Patricia Williams, an art history professor who also worked as an independent curator. Their collective expertise represented exactly the kind of professional validation I needed to understand whether my artistic development had reached a level worth pursuing seriously. The presentation format was straightforward but intimidating. Each artist had 15 minutes to show their work and receive feedback, with the panel asking questions about artistic influences, technical approaches, and career goals. I had prepared extensively, researching each panelist's background and anticipating potential questions about my work and intentions. When my turn arrived, I arranged my paintings on the easels provided, stepping back to let the panel examine them without commentary. The silence during their initial review felt endless, though it probably lasted only a few minutes. I watched their faces for reactions, trying to interpret subtle expressions and body language for clues about their assessment. Marcus Rivera spoke first, his voice thoughtful and measured. "There's sophisticated color work happening here, and your compositional sense is strong. The tension between geometric and organic elements creates visual interest without feeling forced or gimmicky. How long have you been working in this direction?" "About 8 months intensively," I replied, feeling encouraged by his positive tone. "Though I've been making art sporadically for several years." Susan Chen leaned forward to examine one of my larger pieces more closely. "The paint application shows confidence and intention. You're not overworking the surfaces, which is a common problem with artists who haven't developed material fluency yet. What's your background? Are you self-taught or do you have formal training?" I explained my educational history, including my abandoned art school plans and subsequent business degree, along with my current situation working in financial services while developing my artistic practice. The panel listened without judgment, seeming more interested in my current work than my unconventional path to creating it. Dr. Williams asked about my conceptual framework, wanting to understand the ideas driving my visual choices. "The urban-nature dynamic you're exploring has rich potential, especially given your personal experience navigating between corporate and creative environments. Are you conscious of that autobiographical element in the work?" Her question opened up a discussion about intentionality versus intuition in artistic practice, and I found myself articulating ideas about my work that I hadn't fully formulated before the conversation. The process felt like discovering my own artistic voice through dialogue with knowledgeable critics who took my work seriously enough to engage with it intellectually. The 15-minute session extended to nearly 30 minutes as the discussion deepened and the panelists offered specific suggestions for artistic development and career advancement. Marcus Rivera mentioned several upcoming group exhibitions that might be appropriate for my work, while Susan Chen suggested I consider applying for studio residencies that could provide focused time for artistic development. Most significantly, Dr. Williams expressed interest in including one of my paintings in a group exhibition she was curating for the university gallery, themed around contemporary interpretations of landscape and environment. The exhibition would run for 6 weeks during the fall semester, providing exposure to academic audiences and potential collectors who frequented university gallery events. "Would you be interested in participating?" she asked. "I'm looking for work that engages seriously with environmental themes while demonstrating strong formal qualities. Your piece, Urban Confluence, would fit perfectly with the exhibition's conceptual framework." The invitation felt surreal, representing the first time anyone had considered my work worthy of formal exhibition. I accepted immediately, trying to maintain professional composure while internally celebrating this unexpected validation of my artistic development. The drive home from the portfolio review was filled with exhilaration and nervous energy. For the first time since high school, I had received serious critical attention from art professionals who evaluated my work on its own merits rather than through the lens of career practicality. Their feedback confirmed that my artistic development had reached a level of competence and sophistication that warranted continued pursuit. That evening, I called Mrs. Henderson to share the news about the exhibition invitation and the panel's positive reception of my work. Her enthusiasm was immediate and genuine, though not entirely surprising given her earlier assessment of my recent paintings. "This is wonderful, Cameron, but not unexpected," she said. "Your work has been moving in this direction for months. The key now is maintaining momentum and continuing to develop your artistic voice while building professional relationships within the art community." We discussed practical aspects of participating in the university exhibition, including pricing considerations, insurance requirements, and promotional opportunities. Mrs. Henderson offered to help me navigate these professional details, drawing on her decades of experience exhibiting and selling her own work. The most important thing, she emphasized, is treating this as the beginning of a serious artistic career rather than an isolated opportunity. You'll need to continue producing strong work, applying for other exhibitions, and building relationships with galleries and collectors. Success in art requires the same strategic thinking and persistent effort as any other professional field. Her advice resonated with my business training, suggesting that artistic careers could indeed be approached with the same methodical planning and professional development strategies that characterized successful corporate careers. The difference wasn't in the level of seriousness or strategic thinking required, but in the metrics used to measure success and the time horizons typically needed to achieve sustainable outcomes. The following weeks were consumed with preparation for the university exhibition, including creating professional documentation of my work, writing an artist statement that articulated my conceptual interests, and developing pricing strategies based on Mrs. Henderson's guidance and research into comparable artists' market rates. The process of writing about my work forced me to examine my motivations and intentions more carefully than ever before. Why was I drawn to exploring tensions between urban and natural environments? What did the geometric organic visual language communicate that couldn't be expressed through other means? How did my personal experience of navigating between corporate and creative worlds inform the aesthetic choices I was making? Answering these questions helped me understand that my artistic practice wasn't just personal therapy or creative hobby, but a legitimate form of cultural commentary that addressed contemporary issues through visual means. The work engaged with environmental concerns, urban alienation, and the psychological challenges of modern life in ways that could resonate with diverse audiences beyond my immediate personal circle. The realization that my art had broader cultural relevance gave me confidence to begin considering more ambitious career possibilities. If my work could contribute meaningfully to contemporary artistic dialogue while providing personal fulfillment, perhaps building a sustainable creative career wasn't as unrealistic as Victoria had insisted, but pursuing that possibility would require more than just artistic development and professional opportunities. It would require direct confrontation with Victoria's authority and the courage to risk family conflict in service of authentic self-expression. The stakes were rising, and soon I would need to decide whether artistic fulfillment was worth the personal costs of defying my sister's expectations and my family's investment in my business career. The university exhibition opening was scheduled for late September, providing a deadline that focused my creative energy and professional preparation. As the date approached, I found myself working with intensity and purpose that reminded me of my most engaged moments in high school art classes, but with the added dimension of adult understanding about the significance of the opportunities I was pursuing. For the first time since college, I felt genuinely excited about my future possibilities rather than merely competent at managing present responsibilities. The feeling was intoxicating and terrifying, representing everything Victoria had warned me against while simultaneously offering everything I had been missing in my carefully constructed practical life. The University Gallery exhibition opening arrived on a crisp October evening, bringing with it the culmination of months of artistic development and professional preparation. I had invited my parents to attend, though I deliberately withheld the information from Victoria, knowing that her presence would inject tension and criticism into what should have been a celebratory milestone. The gallery space in the university's arts building was elegant and professionally appointed, with high ceilings, adjustable lighting systems, and pristine white walls that provided optimal presentation for the 23 artworks selected by Dr. Williams. My painting, Urban Confluence, occupied a prominent position near the entrance, its bold color interactions immediately visible to visitors as they entered the main exhibition space. Standing before my work in its professional gallery context felt surreal and validating in ways I hadn't anticipated. The painting looked different under museum-quality lighting, with subtle color relationships and textural details becoming more apparent than they had ever been in my studio. The accompanying wall text, which identified me as an emerging Minneapolis artist exploring contemporary landscape themes, represented the first time my work had been presented with institutional authority. Dr. Williams had arranged for a brief artist talk at the opening reception, giving each participating artist 5 minutes to discuss their work with the assembled audience of students, faculty, collectors, and community members. When my turn arrived, I felt nervous but prepared, having rehearsed my presentation multiple times while considering potential questions about my artistic intentions and techniques. Urban Confluence explores the psychological landscape of contemporary City life, I began, gesturing toward the painting's interplay of geometric and organic forms. The piece investigates how we maintain connection to natural rhythms and cycles while inhabiting increasingly artificial environments. The visual tension between structured and flowing elements reflects my own experience navigating between corporate demands and creative expression. The brief presentation generated several thoughtful questions from audience members, including a retired art collector who expressed interest in seeing more of my work and a graduate student researching contemporary landscape painting who wanted to discuss my technical approaches to color interaction. These conversations felt substantive and encouraging, confirming that my work could engage seriously with artistic traditions while addressing contemporary concerns. The most significant encounter of the evening came through Dr. Williams' introduction to Elena Rodriguez, the owner of Meridian Contemporary Gallery, one of the most respected commercial galleries in the Twin Cities region. Elena had attended the opening specifically to see work by artists Dr. Williams was championing, and she spent considerable time examining urban confluence with the analytical attention of someone evaluating potential representation. Your color sense is sophisticated, Elena observed after studying the painting for several minutes. The way you're handling the transition between geometric and organic sections shows real technical control. How long have you been working in this direction? I explained my recent artistic development while trying to gauge her level of professional interest. Gallery representation was still an abstract goal rather than an immediate possibility, but Elena's attention suggested that my work was approaching commercial viability. I'd be interested in seeing more of your recent pieces, she said, offering her business card. Why don't you schedule a studio visit next month? I'm always looking for emerging artists who are developing strong bodies of cohesive work. The invitation felt like crossing a threshold into professional legitimacy that I had barely dared to imagine. Elena's gallery represented established artists whose work sold for substantial sums, and her interest suggested that my artistic development had reached a level worthy of serious commercial consideration. The opening reception continued for nearly 3 hours, with ongoing conversations about the exhibited work and broader discussions about contemporary art practice. I found myself engaging naturally with the artistic community, discussing techniques, influences, and career development strategies with other emerging artists while receiving encouragement from established professionals who remembered their own early exhibition experiences. My parents arrived midway through the reception, clearly uncertain about the gallery environment but genuinely proud to see my work presented in such a professional context. Dad spent considerable time reading the wall text and examining technical details of the painting, while Mom engaged enthusiastically with other visitors about my artistic development and recent creative focus. We had no idea you had continued developing your artistic abilities, Mom said during a quiet moment between conversations. This painting is beautiful, and so much more sophisticated than your high school work. Why didn't you tell us you were pursuing art seriously again? Her question highlighted how completely I had compartmentalized my creative life from family awareness, partly to avoid potential criticism and partly because I hadn't been certain whether my artistic development would lead to meaningful opportunities. Now, standing in a university gallery with my work professionally presented and generating positive response from knowledgeable viewers, the separation seemed unnecessary and counterproductive. I wanted to see whether I could develop my work to a professional level before discussing it with the family, I replied honestly. Victoria's been so clear about her opinions regarding artistic careers that I thought it was better to focus on the work itself rather than debating its viability. Dad nodded thoughtfully, understanding the family dynamics that had influenced my secrecy. Well, this certainly seems professional to me. The setting, the presentation, the quality of the other work here, it's impressive that your painting fits so naturally in this context. Their support felt genuine and encouraging, though I knew that Victoria's reaction would be considerably more complicated. She had invested significant energy in convincing me to abandon artistic pursuits, and my success in developing a credible artistic practice would implicitly challenge her authority and judgment. The following day brought the exhibition review. In the local arts newspaper, written by Margaret Foster, a respected critic who had covered the Twin Cities art scene for over 2 decades. Her assessment of the exhibition was generally positive, with specific mention of several works including mine. Cameron Walsh's Urban Confluence demonstrates sophisticated handling of contemporary landscape themes, Foster wrote. The piece successfully navigates the challenge of addressing environmental concerns through abstract visual language, creating color relationships that suggest both urban energy and organic vitality. Walsh emerges as an artist worth following as their work develops. Reading my name in print as a recognized artist felt like official confirmation of something I had been building toward for months. The review would be read by collectors, gallery owners, and other artists throughout the region, providing exposure that could lead to additional exhibition opportunities and professional connections. Mrs. Henderson called that afternoon to congratulate me on both the successful opening and the positive critical attention. "This is exactly how artistic careers develop," she explained. "One exhibition leads to others, critical recognition opens doors to new opportunities, and gradually you build the professional network and reputation that supports sustainable practice." We discussed Elena Rodriguez's studio visit invitation and the strategic considerations involved in potentially working with a commercial gallery. Mrs. Henderson emphasized the importance of maintaining artistic integrity while navigating business relationships, drawing on her own experience with gallery representation to outline potential benefits and challenges. "Elena's gallery has an excellent reputation," she noted. "She's known for supporting her artists' long-term development rather than just pursuing immediate sales. If she offers representation, it would be a significant opportunity for your career advancement." The prospect of gallery representation felt both exciting and daunting, representing entry into the professional art market that Victoria had consistently dismissed as unrealistic and financially unsustainable. Success at that level would require treating art making as a full-time career rather than an evening hobby, with all the financial risks and lifestyle changes that such a commitment would entail. Elena's studio visit was scheduled for mid-November, providing several weeks to prepare a comprehensive presentation of my recent work and develop a clear articulation of my artistic direction and career goals. The intervening time passed quickly as I focused on completing several new paintings while documenting existing work with professional photography for portfolio presentation. The new pieces explored variations on my established themes while pushing technical and conceptual boundaries in ways that demonstrated ongoing artistic growth. Working with the knowledge that Elena would be evaluating my development trajectory added intensity and focus to my studio practice, though I was careful not to let commercial considerations override authentic creative impulses. 3 days before Elena's scheduled visit, Victoria called unexpectedly, her voice carrying the particular tone she reserved for delivering difficult news or unwelcome observations. She had learned about the university exhibition through our parents, who had mentioned my artistic activities during their regular Sunday phone conversation. "Cameron, I think we need to talk about what you're doing with this art hobby," she began, her choice of the word hobby immediately signaling her perspective on my recent achievements. "Mom mentioned some gallery show at the university, and I'm concerned that you might be getting unrealistic ideas about artistic careers again." "It's not a hobby, Victoria," I replied, feeling immediate defensiveness but trying to maintain composure. "I've been developing my work seriously for over a year, and it's starting to generate professional opportunities." "One university exhibition doesn't constitute professional opportunities," she countered with familiar dismissiveness. "Those kinds of shows are essentially participation trophies. They'll hang anyone's work if it meets basic technical standards. You can't build a career on occasional amateur exhibitions." Her reduction of my achievement to participation trophy status stung particularly because it dismissed not only my artistic development but also the professional judgment of Dr. Williams, Elena Rodriguez, and the critic who had reviewed the exhibition positively. Victoria's assessment required ignoring substantial evidence that my work was being taken seriously by qualified art professionals. "This isn't amateur work," I said, struggling to keep frustration out of my voice. "The exhibition was curated by a museum professional, my work received a positive review in the arts newspaper, and a commercial gallery owner is interested in seeing more of my pieces." Victoria's response was swift and cutting. "Cameron, you're 26 years old with a stable career in financial services. This romantic fantasy about becoming an artist is exactly the kind of impractical thinking I helped you avoid years ago. Don't throw away everything you've built for childhood dreams that were never realistic to begin with." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Victoria systematically dismantling my artistic achievements and future possibilities through the same combination of economic arguments and emotional manipulation that had proven effective during college. She had prepared for this discussion, armed with updated statistics about artistic career outcomes and examples of people who had damaged their financial security by pursuing creative careers, but something had changed since our earlier conversations about artistic careers. My recent success had provided concrete evidence that Victoria's assessment of my abilities and the art market was incomplete and potentially incorrect. The positive response from qualified professionals carried more weight than her theoretical arguments about typical career outcomes for art school graduates. For the first time in our relationship, I found myself questioning Victoria's authority, rather than accepting her superior knowledge and judgment. The confrontation that had been building for months was finally beginning, and neither of us was fully prepared for the intensity it would ultimately reach. The University Gallery exhibition opening arrived on a crisp October evening, bringing with it the culmination of months of artistic development and professional preparation. I had invited my parents to attend, though I deliberately withheld the information from Victoria, knowing that her presence would inject tension and criticism into what should have been a celebratory milestone, the gallery space in the university's arts building was elegant and professionally appointed, with high ceilings, adjustable lighting systems, and pristine white walls that provided optimal presentation for the 23 artworks selected by Dr. Williams. My painting, Urban Confluence, occupied a prominent position near the entrance, its bold color interactions immediately visible to visitors as they entered the main exhibition space. Standing before my work in its professional gallery context felt surreal and validating in ways I hadn't anticipated. The painting looked different under museum-quality lighting, with subtle color relationships and textural details becoming more apparent than they had ever been in my studio. The accompanying wall text, which identified me as an emerging Minneapolis artist exploring contemporary landscape themes, represented the first time my work had been presented with institutional authority. Dr. Williams had arranged for a brief artist talk at the opening reception, giving each participating artist 5 minutes to discuss their work with the assembled audience of students, faculty, collectors, and community members. When my turn arrived, I felt nervous but prepared, having rehearsed my presentation multiple times while considering potential questions about my artistic intentions and techniques. Urban Confluence explores the psychological landscape of contemporary city life, I began, gesturing toward the painting's interplay of geometric and organic forms. The piece investigates how we maintain connection to natural rhythms and cycles while inhabiting increasingly artificial environments. The visual tension between structured and flowing elements reflects my own experience navigating between corporate demands and creative expression. The brief presentation generated several thoughtful questions from audience members, including a retired art collector who expressed interest in seeing more of my work and a graduate student researching contemporary landscape painting who wanted to discuss my technical approaches to color interaction. These conversations felt substantive and encouraging, confirming that my work could engage seriously with artistic traditions while addressing contemporary concerns. The most significant encounter of the evening came through Dr. Williams' introduction to Elena Rodriguez, the owner of Meridian Contemporary Gallery, one of the most respected commercial galleries in the Twin Cities region. Elena had attended the opening specifically to see work by artists Dr. Williams was championing, and she spent considerable time examining Urban Confluence with the analytical attention of someone evaluating potential representation. Your color sense is sophisticated, Elena observed after studying the painting for several minutes. The way you're handling the transition between geometric and organic sections shows real technical control. How long have you been working in this direction? I explained my recent artistic development while trying to gauge her level of professional interest. Gallery representation was still an abstract goal rather than an immediate possibility, but Elena's attention suggested that my work was approaching commercial viability. I'd be interested in seeing more of your recent pieces, she said, offering her business card. Why don't you schedule a studio visit next month? I'm always looking for emerging artists who are developing strong bodies of cohesive work. The invitation felt like crossing a threshold into professional legitimacy that I had barely dared to imagine. Elena's gallery represented established artists whose work sold for substantial sums, and her interest suggested that my artistic development had reached a level worthy of serious commercial consideration. The opening reception continued for nearly 3 hours, with ongoing conversations about the exhibited work and broader discussions about contemporary art practice. I found myself engaging naturally with the artistic community, discussing techniques, influences, and career development strategies with other emerging artists while receiving encouragement from established professionals who remembered their own early exhibition experiences. My parents arrived midway through the reception, clearly uncertain about the gallery environment but genuinely proud to see my work presented in such a professional context. Dad spent considerable time reading the wall text and examining technical details of the painting, while Mom engaged enthusiastically with other visitors about my artistic development and recent creative focus. We had no idea you had continued developing your artistic abilities, Mom said during a quiet moment between conversations. This painting is beautiful, and so much more sophisticated than your high school work. Why didn't you tell us you were pursuing art seriously again? Her question highlighted how completely I had compartmentalized my creative life from family awareness, partly to avoid potential criticism and partly because I hadn't been certain whether my artistic development would lead to meaningful opportunities. Now, standing in a university gallery with my work professionally presented and generating positive response from knowledgeable viewers, the separation seemed unnecessary and counterproductive. I wanted to see whether I could develop my work to a professional level before discussing it with the family, I replied honestly. Victoria's been so clear about her opinions regarding artistic careers that I thought it was better to focus on the work itself rather than debating its viability. Dad nodded thoughtfully, understanding the family dynamics that had influenced my secrecy. Well, this certainly seems professional to me. The setting, the presentation, the quality of the other work here, it's impressive that your painting fits so naturally in this context. Their support felt genuine and encouraging, though I knew that Victoria's reaction would be considerably more complicated. She had invested significant energy in convincing me to abandon artistic pursuits, and my success in developing a credible artistic practice would implicitly challenge her authority and judgment. The following day brought the exhibition review. In the local arts newspaper, written by Margaret Foster, a respected critic who had covered the Twin Cities art scene for over 2 decades. Her assessment of the exhibition was generally positive, with specific mention of several works including mine. Cameron Walsh's Urban Confluence demonstrates sophisticated handling of contemporary landscape themes, Foster wrote. The piece successfully navigates the challenge of addressing environmental concerns through abstract visual language, creating color relationships that suggest both urban energy and organic vitality. Walsh emerges as an artist worth following as their work develops. Reading my name in print as a recognized artist felt like official confirmation of something I had been building toward for months. The review would be read by collectors, gallery owners, and other artists throughout the region, providing exposure that could lead to additional exhibition opportunities and professional connections. Mrs. Henderson called that afternoon to congratulate me on both the successful opening and the positive critical attention. This is exactly how artistic careers develop, she explained. One exhibition leads to others, critical recognition opens doors to new opportunities, and gradually you build the professional network and reputation that supports sustainable practice. We discussed Elena Rodriguez's studio visit invitation and the strategic considerations involved in potentially working with a commercial gallery. Mrs. Henderson emphasized the importance of maintaining artistic integrity while navigating business relationships, drawing on her own experience with gallery representation to outline potential benefits and challenges. Elena's gallery has an excellent reputation, she noted. She's known for supporting her artists' long-term development rather than just pursuing immediate sales. If she offers representation, it would be a significant opportunity for your career advancement. The prospect of gallery representation felt both exciting and daunting, representing entry into the professional art market that Victoria had consistently dismissed as unrealistic and financially unsustainable. Success at that level would require treating art making as a full-time career rather than an evening hobby, with all the financial risks and lifestyle changes that such a commitment would entail. Elena's studio visit was scheduled for mid-November, providing several weeks to prepare a comprehensive presentation of my recent work and develop a clear articulation of my artistic direction and career goals. The intervening time passed quickly as I focused on completing several new paintings while documenting existing work with professional photography for portfolio presentation. The new pieces explored variations on my established themes while pushing technical and conceptual boundaries in ways that demonstrated ongoing artistic growth. Working with the knowledge that Elena would be evaluating my development trajectory added intensity and focus to my studio practice, though I was careful not to let commercial considerations override authentic creative impulses. 3 days before Elena's scheduled visit, Victoria called unexpectedly, her voice carrying the particular tone she reserved for delivering difficult news or unwelcome observations. She had learned about the university exhibition through our parents, who had mentioned my artistic activities during their regular Sunday phone conversation. "Cameron, I think we need to talk about what you're doing with this art hobby," she began. Her choice of the word hobby immediately signaling her perspective on my recent achievements. "Mom mentioned some gallery show at the university, and I'm concerned that you might be getting unrealistic ideas about artistic careers again." "It's not a hobby, Victoria," I replied, feeling immediate defensiveness but trying to maintain composure. "I've been developing my work seriously for over a year, and it's starting to generate professional opportunities." "One university exhibition doesn't constitute professional opportunities," she countered with familiar dismissiveness. "Those kinds of shows are essentially participation trophies. They'll hang anyone's work if it meets basic technical standards. You can't build a career on occasional amateur exhibitions." Her reduction of my achievement to participation trophy status stung particularly because it dismissed not only my artistic development but also the professional judgment of Dr. Williams, Elena Rodriguez, and the critic who had reviewed the exhibition positively. Victoria's assessment required ignoring substantial evidence that my work was being taken seriously by qualified art professionals. "This isn't amateur work," I said, struggling to keep frustration out of my voice. "The exhibition was curated by a museum professional, my work received a positive review in the arts newspaper, and a commercial gallery owner is interested in seeing more of my pieces." Victoria's response was swift and cutting. "Cameron, you're 26 years old with a stable career in financial services. This romantic fantasy about becoming an artist is exactly the kind of impractical thinking I helped you avoid years ago. Don't throw away everything you've built for childhood dreams that were never realistic to begin with." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Victoria systematically dismantling my artistic achievements and future possibilities through the same combination of economic arguments and emotional manipulation that had proven effective during college. She had prepared for this discussion, armed with updated statistics about artistic career outcomes and examples of people who had damaged their financial security by pursuing creative careers, but something had changed since our earlier conversations about artistic careers. My recent success had provided concrete evidence that Victoria's assessment of my abilities and the art market was incomplete and potentially incorrect. The positive response from qualified professionals carried more weight than her theoretical arguments about typical career outcomes for art school graduates. For the first time in our relationship, I found myself questioning Victoria's authority, rather than accepting her superior knowledge and judgment. The confrontation that had been building for months was finally beginning, and neither of us was fully prepared for the intensity it would ultimately reach. The evening after our phone conversation, I found myself unable to concentrate on either my day job responsibilities or my studio work. Victoria's dismissive assessment of my achievements had triggered familiar self-doubt, but it also sparked a defensive anger that felt different from my previous responses to her criticism. This time, I had external validation that contradicted her judgments, evidence that my artistic development was being recognized by people with no obligation to encourage me. I called Mrs. Henderson to discuss the conversation, needing perspective from someone who understood both artistic careers and family dynamics around creative pursuits. She listened patiently as I recounted Victoria's arguments and my own conflicted feelings about pursuing gallery representation while maintaining family harmony. "Victoria's response sounds like fear," Mrs. Henderson observed after I had finished describing the conversation. "She's invested considerable energy in shaping your career choices, and your artistic success threatens that investment. If you succeed as an artist, it proves that her advice was wrong and her authority was misplaced." Her analysis resonated with observations I had been reluctant to acknowledge about Victoria's motivations. My sister's opposition to my artistic pursuits wasn't entirely about protecting me from financial hardship. It was also about maintaining her position as the family's voice of practical wisdom and professional success. "The question," Mrs. Henderson continued, "is whether you're prepared to succeed despite her disapproval. Because that's what pursuing a serious artistic career will require. Victoria isn't going to change her mind about the value of creative work, especially if your success undermines her previous advice." The following week brought Elena Rodriguez's studio visit, an appointment that felt like a referendum on whether my artistic development warranted continued pursuit despite family opposition. I had prepared extensively, organizing my work chronologically to demonstrate progression while highlighting pieces that best represented my current artistic direction. Elena arrived punctually at my converted spare bedroom studio, immediately beginning a systematic examination of the paintings I had arranged for her review. Her approach was professional and analytical, studying technical execution, compositional choices, and thematic coherence with the focused attention of someone evaluating potential investment opportunities. "You've developed a distinctive visual vocabulary," she said after examining 12 recent pieces. "The work has consistency without being repetitive, and I can see clear growth in both technical control and conceptual sophistication. How many pieces do you typically complete in a month?" I explained my working schedule, balancing studio time with my full-time job while maintaining steady productivity that had yielded approximately 30 finished paintings over the past year. Elena nodded approvingly, understanding that sustainable artistic careers required consistent output alongside quality development. "Commercial galleries need artists who can maintain regular exhibition schedules," she explained. "Collectors want to see ongoing development, and the market requires fresh work to sustain interest and sales. Your productivity level suggests you could handle the demands of professional representation." The conversation shifted to business. Considerations, including pricing strategies, exhibition frequency, and the practical aspects of gallery relationships. Elena outlined her approach to artist development, emphasizing long-term career building rather than immediate profit maximization, with commission structures that supported artists' ability to continue creating while building market presence. "I'd like to offer you representation," she said after our discussion had covered both artistic and business considerations. "We could start with a group exhibition this spring, featuring emerging artists whose work aligns with contemporary collecting trends. If that goes well, we could discuss a solo exhibition for next fall." The offer felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, representing everything I had hoped for while pursuing artistic development, but also requiring commitment to a career path that would inevitably generate family conflict and financial uncertainty. Gallery representation meant treating art making as my primary professional identity rather than a sophisticated hobby that complemented my financial services career. "I appreciate the offer," I replied, trying to maintain composure while processing the significance of the opportunity. "Could I have a few days to consider the implications and discuss it with people whose judgment I trust?" Elena understood the magnitude of the decision, having worked with other emerging artists who faced similar choices between security and creative fulfillment. "Take whatever time you need," she said. "But don't wait too long to decide. The spring exhibition is scheduled for March, which means we'd need to begin planning within the next month." That evening, I called my parents to share Elena's offer and seek their perspective on the decision I was facing. Their response was more supportive than I had anticipated, though tempered by practical concerns about financial stability and career security. "We're proud of what you've accomplished," Dad said during our long conversation about artistic careers and family expectations. "This gallery woman wouldn't offer representation unless she believed your work could sell. That suggests your talent is real and marketable." Mom expressed similar enthusiasm while acknowledging the risks involved in leaving stable employment for uncertain creative income. "Maybe you could start part-time," she suggested. "Keep your day job while testing whether gallery sales can generate enough income to eventually support you entirely." Their pragmatic approach to the transition felt more realistic than Victoria's absolute dismissal of artistic careers, acknowledging both opportunities and challenges without predetermined conclusions about inevitable failure. For the first time, I felt family support for pursuing creative work seriously rather than just tolerating it as a harmless diversion. The following day brought an unexpected call from Margaret Foster, the critic who had reviewed the university exhibition positively. She had learned about Elena's representation through the interconnected Twin Cities art community and wanted to discuss a feature article about emerging artists who were transitioning from other careers. "Your story represents a broader trend," she explained. "More people are pursuing creative careers later in life, often after establishing financial stability in other fields. Readers are interested in how that transition works practically and what motivates people to take those risks." The interview lasted over an hour, covering my artistic development, the challenges of balancing creative work with business employment, and the family dynamics that had initially discouraged my artistic pursuits. Margaret's questions were thoughtful and probing, designed to explore both personal motivations and broader cultural issues around career choice and creative fulfillment. "What would you say to someone whose family opposed their artistic ambitions?" she asked toward the end of our conversation. "I'd say that family love doesn't always manifest as family support," I replied, thinking about Victoria's combination of genuine concern and controlling behavior. "Sometimes people who care about you try to protect you from risks by limiting your possibilities. But ultimately, you have to decide whether security is worth sacrificing authenticity." The article was scheduled to appear in the Weekend Arts section, providing additional exposure that could influence public and collector response to my work. More importantly, it represented external validation of my artistic journey that would be difficult for Victoria to dismiss as amateur self-indulgence. 3 days before the article's publication, Victoria called again, her tone more urgent than during our previous conversation. She had learned about Elena's representation offer through our parents, and the prospect of my committing fully to an artistic career had triggered escalated concern about my decision-making. "Cameron, I'm flying to Minneapolis this weekend," she announced without preamble. "We need to discuss this gallery situation face-to-face before you make a decision you'll regret for the rest of your life." Her determination to intervene directly signaled how seriously she viewed the threat my artistic success posed to her authority and worldview. The final confrontation between us was approaching, carrying implications that would extend far beyond career choice to fundamental questions about family loyalty, personal autonomy, and the courage required to pursue authentic self-expression despite opposition from people whose approval had always mattered most. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.